Hello, everyone. Welcome to our first Wednesday series. Today, we are going to be looking at five critical factors that are required to support your GMP compliance. Uh, at NSF, we've been running these series to help you understand the various aspects of GMP compliance, various aspects of remediation, and also all the critical aspects that are important to you in terms of helping you with the GMP compliance. Um, so, my name is Varun Venkatachalum. I'm a principal consultant at NSF. I'm part of the pharma and biotech consulting team, and uh, and I'm here to help you understand the uh, the critical aspects that are important to you in terms of GMP, in terms of remediation, and these are things that we've seen from our experience working in remediation projects, helping clients overcome challenges with regulatory agencies, and helping our clients in getting through you know getting through getting through deficiencies that have been received from regulatory agencies. So, what is NSF? NSF is an independent, not-for-profit, non-governmental public health and safety organization, and our mission and focus have always been protecting and improving human health. So, to illustrate, NSF has been around for a long time. We specialize in a plethora of areas. If you look at the bottom, you look at all of our offerings. We specialize in setting standards, testing, certification, auditing, consulting, and training. And we work in a wide variety of areas such as med devices, pharma, biotech, food, and other areas. And chances are, if you had a bottle of water in North America, there's a high chance that it has been certified by NSF. So that's NSF for you. So before we dive into our topic today, I just wanted to set the expectations that today's presentation is all about helping you understand five critical factors in helping you sustain your GMP compliance. And we are also trying to help you understand the criticality of those factors. We're trying to give you an overview of what are the things that you can do to mitigate any sort of risks in those areas, and how we can help. So, if you look at regulatory citations over the years, and specifically, we've tried to summarize citations from the past 3 years. If you look at the FDA, they've got a site where they summarize all of their inspection observations. If you look at the last 3 years, that it's pretty consistent in terms of where the deviations are coming from. The deviations primarily pertain to quality systems, and when it comes to quality systems, the majority of those citations pertain to standard operating procedures or the lack of it. The next most cited area is deviations management, pertaining to investigations and how firms handle non-conformances and corrective actions and so on. And the third most cited area is the laboratory, particularly around laboratory controls, testing, test methods, and also the documentation pertaining to laboratory. And if you look at the MHRA, MHRA had this report. They summarized their citations for the year 2019. And if you look at those, the illustration over here is based on the chapter reference. And again, these are consistent with what we found with the FDA citation analysis. So if you look at the top three categories, they always pertain to quality systems, and majority of those are primarily SOP related and investigations, and followed by laboratory controls. So with that, we'll look at another interesting topic that that has been the talk of the town recently. Uh, there's the operational excellence is one of those topics that has been in the play for a long time. And if you look at the paradigm shift in terms of how people look at business excellence and operational excellence, it has always been business focused. But right now we're seeing a shift away from that. We're seeing people look at quality and quality excellence, and that is something that has been of intense focus. If you look at the FDA recently released some guidance around that. The 2019 U.S. Federal Drug Shortage Task Force, it was specifically constituted to look at the reasons and the causative factors behind drug shortages. And they concluded that 62% of all the shortages between 2013 and 2017 were attributed to manufacturing or product quality problems. And the report also found that that one of the root causes for this particular issue is that firms don't get recognized or rewarded for having a mature quality system. So right now, all of the firms, what they focus on is getting the bare basics right, getting all of their GMP compliances right, but there's not much focus on on improving those quality systems, improving the maturity of their quality systems. So that is one thing that the report found, that there's not enough recognition or a reward mechanism to help manufacturers scale up their quality excellence maturity. So with that, the US FDA has recently come out with a white paper. The Office of Product Quality, they've started piloting a quality management maturity rating system. And that is something that you will hear a lot about in the coming years. And what it essentially means is they're trying to come up with a rating system that helps people understand the maturity of the compliance framework of a particular firm. This could be suppliers, this could be business, this could be people trying to buy product from a firm, or this could also be beneficial for end customers as well, who know what they're buying, who understand the compliance framework or the maturity of the compliance framework of the firms that they're buying their drugs from. So with that, one of the things that we also wanted to touch upon was the maturity evolution, right? Now, with the FDA keenly looking at quality management maturity rating system, we wanted to help you understand that quality maturity is not something that is alien to all of us. It has always been there. It's just that all of the firms, and they're all at different stages, and one of the things that we routinely see during our remediation projects is that some firms lack the understanding or self-realization as to where they stand. So to help people understand, we've tried to illustrate the different stages of maturity when it comes to compliance. If you look at the illustration in front of you, we've got different stages. These are progressive in nature. And, you would usually start at the regressive stage where, greenfield facilities, they're just putting in their processes. They're in the qualification stage. So they're just bringing in the basic GXPs and, the GMPs and the GDPs. So at this point in time, it is pretty basic. Then they move up. Once they qualify and validate their processes, they move up to a sort of a reactive stage where they just there's a high level of unplanned work, and the basic compliance is in place, but there's a high level of unplanned events, specifically deviations. And this is a stage where there's a lot of firefighting, and it is a stage where the compliance framework is stress tested. After a point in time, firms, they do move up to another stage. We would like to call this the intermediate stage, where there's, the amount of unplanned events comes down. There is an equal ratio of planned and unplanned events, but there's still a lot of firefighting. And one of the things that people tend to, tend not to appreciate is the fact that, firefighting, it causes a lot of undue stress on systems and also manpower. The amount of stress on manpower, especially resources that are directly involved in the compliance activities, is just really high when you're doing a lot of firefighting, and it is really not sustainable in the long run. And there is negligible or minimal room for systems or competency improvement initiatives when you're firefighting all the time. So what do we do? So we've seen some firms that have come up with specific interventions that are either strategic or operational, and to try and break through to a much more sustainable stage. And we'd like to call it the proactive stage. So basically, in this stage, you've got low levels of unplanned events, and there is sort of an institutionalization of improvement activities. So the proactive stage is a stage where the sites at this stage are really ahead of the curve, and there is a higher probability that sites at this stage would end up adopting a lot of best practices, automation, automating your compliance, some of your compliance processes, and they also tend to attract the best talent, because the talent goes where there is a lot of learning opportunities, and they are also averse to firefighting all the time. So it is also a sort of a chicken and egg situation, right? If you're always firefighting, you would not be able to hold on to your best talent, because the best talent are always pushed to the front lines when you're firefighting, and that tends to wear them out, and they will eventually leave. And it's a vicious cycle, and it needs specific interventions, whether you could do it internally or whether you would need you could take the help of external consultants. You would need an intervention that would really help you with breaking through to the proactive and much more sustainable stage. So at the end, what we have the target stage, and this is sort of like the end target that most firms work for, and it is sort of an industry benchmark where you have a high level of planned events, a high level of improvement opportunities and improvement activities that are ongoing, and there's a low level of unplanned events. So that's sort of the target stage. So this is the maturity evolution that we normally see. And it is the primary takeaway from this slide is that it is very important for you to be self-aware as to where you stand and what you really need to get to the next stage. And quality excellence is not a luxury anymore. It is something that would be expected with what you're seeing with the quality management maturity rating system that is coming up. It would be pertinent for you to invest in improvement activities and strategic and operational initiatives aimed at improving your compliance levels. Okay, with that, I'll move on to the 5 factors that we were talking about. So if you look at the 5 factors, we've tried to identify the ones that are very critical. Again, this is kind of from the citation analysis and also from our experience working with a lot of our clients in the remediation space. If you look at factor 1, it's not a surprise. Getting the basics right, getting your SOPs right, getting your documentation right is absolutely paramount for you to be able to achieve a sustainable compliance level. And the next factor is getting your deviation management process in place and having an effective process. The third factor is looking at human performance. And when we say human performance, we're not just looking at human errors. We're looking at human performance as a whole. And that is something that you need to be paying a lot of attention to. The next factor is COVID-19 and the Great Resignation, that has come about as a result of COVID-19, and also as a result of various other factors that are not directly related to COVID-19. And how does that affect the pharma and biotech space? And the last factor is basically about how do you institute a self-awareness program? How do you have an effective internal audit process? So those are the 5 factors that we will be looking at today. So it is important for all of us to understand that there are various other factors and elements that are not covered today that are also critical to your GMP compliance. But it is important for you to understand that these are the ones that we deem to be a good starting point to start at, and then move on to the other areas to see if you could improve your compliance status. So the first factor, standard operating procedures. SOPs are really the bedrock of our quality system, and they are our quality system in writing, right? So it is important for us to understand that SOPs are not just merely documentation. They are a reflection of your quality system, and that they are a reflection of how you want to run your process and how you would like to have your controls in place. So there's something called a document hierarchy, and this is something that is common knowledge. But what people sometimes fail to understand or appreciate is the fact that a document hierarchy exists for a reason. And that is sort of like a delineation of how you store or record your information. How do you articulate your instructions? So how do you have your policies, and how do you institute procedures in place? And there's no right or wrong answer in terms of how you use these terminologies, but it is always important for you to have some sort of delineation across your documentation, so that you would have sort of an understanding of how you would deal with each of those classes of documentation. For example, records are to be dealt with with a different strategy as against a policy. A policy is sort of your corporate policy that kind of lays out your intention, and it kind of lays out your vision and your mission. But it is to be understood that you need to have an understanding of how you delineate each of those documentation types to be able to handle them effectively. Okay, with that, I just wanted to give you an understanding of what are the critical aspects of an effective SOP management system. So if you look at an SOP, we're looking at how do you design them. So as I said, the hierarchy and how you've designed your documentation management system is very important. And again, user centricity. Your end customer is your primary audience, right? And you need to be able to have a user-centric documentation system. So are your SOPs easy to follow, and are there job aids for seamless execution? That is very critical for you to be able to have an effective system. And coverage. Do your SOPs cover the entire gamut of your operations and quality systems? More often than not, what we see is the SOPs, they would cover the steady state process, but when something out of the ordinary happens or something breaks, when there's a deviation, there is a lack of detail in the SOPs as to what must one do when there is a deviation from a steady state process. And that is something that you need to keep in mind, that your SOPs are not just about the steady state process, it is also about understanding and articulating what do you do when things go wrong. And detail. Do you understand the right amount of detail that needs to go into your SOPs? Again, this goes back to the hierarchy. When you delineate your documentation system, you're able to identify and understand the level of detail that goes into each of these documentation types. So it is very important for you to have a hierarchy in as sort of like your base for your documentation system before you go about uh, uh, churning out SOPs. Uh, training. Training is it is very critical because that kind of translates your procedures into reality. What I mean by that is your training systems are the ones that help propagate the knowledge and information from your SOPs. So do you have the right sort of training system? For example, some SOPs can be read and understood, and there are some SOPs that would require a classroom training, and there would be some SOPs or work instructions that would require you to have an on-the-job training process. So you need to be able to have an effective and at the same time a custom training process that would be tailor-made for your procedures and your type of operations. The last but not the least factor is change management. Do you have an effective document change management system? How do your changes get reflected in the SOPs? Is it through a change control process? Is it effective? Are there gaps in your process where you'd have a kappa as part of a deviation process and that does not get integrated into your SOPs? Do these things happen? So you need to be aware of these risks in your change management process so that you have an effective documentation management system. Okay, with that, I'll move on to the next factor. The other critical factor that we end up working a lot for, we work as NSF, we work in a lot of remediation projects, and a majority of those projects are directly or indirectly linked to deviations management. Now, deviations management, most people, when they look at deviations, they look at it as the malady, right? Sometimes they are also a symptom. They can also be a symptom of a deep-rooted systemic issue. And, as you can see on the illustration on the slide, there's something called the iceberg phenomenon, right? There's only the tip of the iceberg that is visible over the surface of the water, and there's a lot more that is concealed underneath the surface of the water. So the deviations are also sometimes like that, because your problem, what you see on the surface, is only a part of it, and there are a lot more contributing factors that are below the surface, and unless you have an effective deviation management process, you will not be able to identify any of those. And that would be sort of an inherent risk in your process that you would go on carrying, and that would end up compounding your process risks and your challenges. I mean, the challenges that you face when you are in a steady state process. So there are usually more than one contributor factor. That's why we call them contributing factors, because root cause is not always a singular entity. And that is one of the most popular misconceptions out there, that root cause is a singular entity. It is not. It can be sometimes, but in most cases and more often than not, it is always, there are always multiple contributory factors. Unless you're able to identify those multiple contributing factors, you will not be able to arrest that issue and have an effective corrective or a preventive action. So deviations must always be investigated proportionate to their risk. And this is something that we see again and again in our projects is, how much what are the issues that you investigate? And what are the ones that you would not investigate and have an appropriate, risk assessment to be able to, state that we're not going to investigate this. This is acceptable risk, and we have mitigation and detection systems in place. So you need to have a fine balance. You need to be able to understand that not every issue needs to be investigated. But at the same time, if you're not investigating something, do you have controls and detection mechanisms in place to be able to mitigate the risk in first place? So that is a very important thing, because if you end up investigating every issue, you are again stressing your system, because you only have so many people in your, in your investigation team. Because most of the firms that we see have a dedicated investigation team or a dedicated team within the quality organization that are responsible for investigations. And there's only so much bandwidth that's available when it comes to deviations. So it is very important for you to be able to understand how much you investigate and which ones you don't. And, the last thing that I wanted to say here in terms of the deviation process is, again, deviations cannot be solved from behind the desk. That is very, very important. Always go to where the action is. Always engage with people who are involved in the process. Have a multidisciplinary team. Get the SMEs in place, because investigations should not and cannot be solved behind the desk. So with that, I just wanted to say one last thing on this slide is that, it is important for us to understand the ownership of investigations. Now, we see a lot of clients that are moving towards an operational ownership model. Now, what I mean by that is when we have an investigation in a particular area, it is always, the responsibility of quality is they would raise a deviation and just sort of, push it over the fence for quality to handle the deviation. And this would eventually lead to delays because the folks in quality are not experts in that particular process. And they would end up having to rely on the user group to be able to articulate what the problem is and also to help understand what the impact is for that particular issue. Now, with the new mechanism that, some firms are moving towards, the operational ownership model where the user is responsible for all the deviations within their system, and quality would act as sort of a facilitator, a coach, and also provide oversight for the review and approval process. So that is something that, there are some firms that are piloting this process. Now, bear in mind, you need to be able to, if you want to move to such a model, you need to be able to understand that deviations must be sort of part of the workload calculation when you're hiring or when you're estimating the amount of manpower for your user group, because more often than not, that is the last thing that gets incorporated into the workload analysis when you're trying to hire or estimate the amount of manpower you need in your user or your operational group. So it is very important for you to understand that deviations must be part of the workload calculations. So the biggest takeaway here is we see that a deviation backlog can significantly compound your issues multifold, because, again, going back to the chicken and egg issue, right? You keep having deviations, your focus would be on the deviations and not on regular operations. And you would end up having a lot more deviations because you're focused on fixing the issues, and you don't have enough manpower or bandwidth to look at system improvement or to look at even day-to-day operations. And you end up having a lot more issues in the long run. So it is important for you to understand that your deviation management process should be effective to the extent that you don't have backlogs. Okay, with that, we just wanted to sort of articulate getting the basic framework that is needed for an effective deviation management process. Again, this is pretty basic in terms of the focus areas. And, we would like to articulate that it is important for you to have tick all of these boxes to be able to have an effective deviation management process. Now, the first thing that you need to do is to have an effective triage process, because you need to be able to catch all unplanned events early. You need to have a notification to management process, a real-time logging process so that you're able to catch all of the non-conformances. And you need to have regular cadence to be able to oversee that triage process. And then there's this classification mechanism where you need to classify your deviations. More often than not, we see a generic classification model where people have the critical, major, and minor classifications, but people are really not clear as to what they actually mean. And there's no consistent methodology to say that this deviation, a particular deviation, would be critical or it would be a major or a minor. So it is important for you to have your classifications right and also have those terminologies in place, and also train your people so that you're able to uh, they're able to assess the risk and also classify those deviations appropriately. The other important aspect is risk assessments. It is important for you to have an effective risk assessment process. At the same time, when you perform a risk assessment, try and evaluate if you can have some sort of a repository, because a risk assessment is something that you can leverage again when you have a similar issue. So try and see if you could have a repository of your risk assessments so that that is linked to your deviations, and you don't have to keep reinventing the wheel again. And it really helps take off a lot of those helps with the workload of the investigator as well. And as I said in the previous slide, not all events require an investigation. And so it is very critical for you to have a triage and classification process to be able to identify events that do not require an investigation. The other important thing is investigation methodology and process. Now, everyone uses DMAC or the 6M process. But what we see lacking in most cases is the fact that there's no standardization. There's no consistent methodology that is used. And you need to be able to understand that your investigators need to be consistent with what they use, and everyone needs to have a standard understanding and understanding and appreciation of the investigation framework, so that you have a consistent deviation process. And how do you achieve that? You need to have standard tools. You need to have standard job aids. For example, if you have human errors, the first thing you do is you would have an interview, right? And more often than not, what we see is there's no standard interview template. There's no guidance. And interviews, in some cases, interviews are not taken, and in some cases, the questions are usually yes and no, that lead to yes and no answers. So it is important for you to have standard tools and job aids that would really help your investigators. And ownership, again, we've talked about this in the previous slide. It is about who owns these investigations. Do we have ownership and accountability from the user group, and that that investigations are not just owned by the quality management process. It is also a responsibility of the user group. And the last thing is about competency. More often than not, what we see is investigations, it's a realm that most people are averse to, because of the fact that there's a lot of firefighting with deviations management, and there's a lot of there's deficiency in how you train your people, and it is important for you to have a qualified investigator pool that has its own incentives as well. Now, what I mean by incentives is you need to be able to reward and recognize people who are helping you fix your issues. So when you have a qualified investigator pool, you help them develop their competency, help them with certifications, so that you have a qualified investigator pool, and you have different roles within that pool, because an investigation process would require facilitators. When you have a critical investigation that has when you have people from different teams, you need someone facilitating that investigation. So you need to have facilitators, you need to have subject matter experts, you need to have technical writers. So you need to have a pool of qualified people that are incentivized, that are trained, and that are certified. And it is absolutely important for you to have this qualified pool to be able to have an effective deviation management process. So that's deviations management, and I'll move on to the next factor, which is human performance. As I said before, human performance is not just about human errors, and we need to be able to understand that human performance is the biggest variable in a heavily regulated industry such as ours. So it is important for us to have a deeper understanding of how humans operate and react. And at a strategic level, you need to be able to have a human-centric operating model. Now, what I mean by that is, if you look at the illustration on your slide, you have the operating model and you have an operating environment. An operating model is the design of your system. Basically, do you have the right people in the right place, competency mapping? Do you have empowered teams? Do you have training? Do you have rewards and recognition? Do you have a system in place that would help, people succeed in their roles? And the other thing is about the process. When you have the operating model in place, it is also important for you to have the right operating environment. The ways of working. Do you have the right ways of working that would help people perform better? Do you have a user-centric design? Do you have automation in place that would help reduce the workload? Now, one of the things that we see with human errors is human errors are usually a function of a difficult or inefficient operating environment. If you have people doing the same tasks over and over again, and there's a lot of transcription, there's a lot of changes in the process, that's when you see a lot of potential for human errors. And it is important for you to have an operating environment that helps mitigate those risks with human errors. So a user-friendly operating environment can really, really help you when it comes to mitigating systemic errors. Now, designing error-proof or tolerant systems, again, processes should be of utmost importance. I'll just articulate one example. With your cash machines, the earlier cash machines, when we had those the archaic models, we had the cards that would go in, and sometimes you would forget to take it out after taking the cash out, right? And getting a replacement card isn't easy when you have to, there's a lot of paperwork involved. You have to go back to the bank, and there's also a risk that your card details might get stolen. Now, with an error-tolerant and an error-proof design, the modern cash machines, they will have some sort of an alarm for you to take your card out when you finished your transaction, or in some cases, you would not be able to complete your transaction without taking your card out. So that's sort of an illustration of how design has evolved to be error-proof and error-tolerant. And it is important for us to understand and appreciate those facts. Okay, so human errors, as I said, human performance is not just about human errors, but it is also important to understand that human errors are an important part of human performance, and it is something that needs to be dealt with. And it is something that needs to have a specific focus, because more often than not, when we see investigations that conclude human error as a root cause, they would never go beyond just the surface. They would not try and look at what actually went wrong, and is there an inherent risk or a systemic risk that this could happen again? Because a human error is not individualistic. Because if someone makes an error, there's a high chance that another person can make the same error. So it is important to understand that human error is the consequence, but rarely the cause of mistakes. And human error must be the starting point and not the conclusion when it comes to human error investigations. There is a very worrying statistic that gets quoted. It is about the fatalities due to human errors in the hospital system in the U.S. And there is an estimation that about 250,000 people die every year due to medical errors in the U.S. alone. And that is just the U.S. alone. Imagine the number of fatalities or grave injuries or consequences due to human error in the medical field across the world. One of the major pharma companies estimated the cost of human error to be approximately about $2.2 million per year, and another in excess of $150 million. Now, what they mean by the cost of human error is, it could be rework, it could be the cost of deviation, it could be the cost of rejection, batch rejection, it could be recall, And beyond just the financial aspects of it, there's also the fact that there's a loss of reputation, there's the increased regulatory scrutiny when it comes to a recall. So there's a lot of ramifications when it comes to human errors. And it is important to understand again that errors can be caused by active or latent failures. As I said, human error is the consequence, and it must be the starting point. It cannot be the conclusion. So you need to be able to understand what are the causative factors. And there are two types of failures that could cause these human errors. There's the active failure and there's a latent failure. Active failures are mistakes made by people. There's just straight mistakes. For example, you forget to perform a particular step, and that is an active failure. A latent failure is basically a system weakness, which would cause, for example, an SOP is designed for a steady state process and something goes wrong, there's no guidance in the SOP. So what the person or the technician who's following the SOP is doing is basically using tribal knowledge or using his or her experience to come up with what to do next. And that is a system weakness because you're allowing that mistake to happen because of your design of your process. And that is important for you to understand that, a latent failure is a lot more critical in terms of, having a mitigation in place. And you need to be able to identify those as part of your investigation. So based on our experience working with multiple clients below, these are our high-level recommendations that, we have for you. So always focus on looking for the error chain, identify the true root cause, always identify the true root cause, and hunt down the latent system errors. As I said earlier, it is always the latent failures that are incredibly difficult to spot and are difficult to fix. And it is important for you to identify those. Always use FMEA or any sort of risk assessment techniques so that you're able to try and mitigate those risks that are identified during your investigation. During the design phase, you can always ask what can go wrong and engineer it out. So when you are designing a process, when you're designing a particular procedure, try and look at it from a human performance angle and see what could go wrong. And that is very important for you to have an error tolerant or an error proof design. And last but not the least, 80% of your actions should be preventative and only 20% should be corrective. Now, that is very important for you because when it comes to human performance, as I said, it is not about the individual, and it could be, it is something that is a potential risk, and that could occur to anyone. So it is important for you to have, your preventive actions in place. And, if you have a lot more corrective actions and preventive actions, it would be firefighting. You're just correcting, you're doing spot fixes, you're not fixing your systemic issues, and you would end up having a lot of recurrences and, and as a result, a lot of firefighting. So it is important for you to be able to understand that. So human errors and human performance is very important, and not just from a deviation management perspective. It is also very important for you from a documentation perspective, from a process design perspective. And you need to be able to appreciate the fact that human performance is your biggest variable, and it needs to be a critical aspect for you, a critical design element for you when you're looking to come up with new process or documentation. Okay, so with that, I'll move to the next factor, staff shortages. Now, this is a recent phenomenon, and with COVID, with the pandemic, it is sort of, it has compounded the staffing shortages that are in place. There's this great term that is being used a lot is it's the Great Resignation. According to the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics, over 47 million Americans quit their jobs in the 3 months from April, May, June, and July. And this is the statistic at the end of July 2021. They said about 47 million Americans quit their job. And another reason when we try to do a deep dive into why people are quitting their jobs is, we looked at a survey by a job seeker survey, and one of the key findings was that 35% of workers have declined or declined a job offer that would require them to work full time on location or in an office. And when searching for a new job, 24% said that work-life balance was the biggest factor when it came to whether they accepted or rejected a job. So the pandemic has changed the mindset of people, and people are realizing, that they're realizing the fact that it is important for them to have a better work-life balance, spend more time with family, have benefits that are specific to their well-being. So it is important for us to be able to appreciate all of these facts. And a recent Pew survey, a research survey, found that 65% of the workers reported feeling uncomfortable coming back to office, and 57% chose to work from home because of COVID. So the risk of contracting an illness has become has sort of magnified with the pandemic, and people are averse to going back to the offices. They're averse to passing on illness to their families, having seen the devastation that the pandemic has brought upon all of us. So what does that mean to the pharma and biotech industry? So we are not immune to this phenomenon. It is not something that is specific to a particular industry. It is not specific to the services industry, although the services industry is the most, it had the most impact with people leaving, a lot more people leaving the services industry. But it is also important to understand that the pharma and biotech industry is not immune to this. So what can we do? What are the sort of mitigation actions that we can take to be able to retain people and also not stress your workforce during an already stressful period that we are all going through. So it is important to have an open and clear communication, have clear guidelines as to who will return to work, when they will return to work, what are the expectations. Have an open and clear communication. It should be a two-way street. Invest in employees. Again, when we say invest in employees, it is about helping them understand that it is you're investing in upskilling and training your employees, and specifically in your external trainings and certifications to help them keep motivated. Addressing burnout. Again, going back to my the quality maturity slide. We talked about firefighting. Constant firefighting wears out people, and the focus on quality maturity can really help alleviate the stress. It is absolutely important for us to address burnout because people are not 100% when it comes to their emotional well-being with the pandemic and with the personal stresses that are happening in all of our lives. So it is important for us to understand that there's a lesser tolerance to burnout at this point in time. So we need to be able to, focus on quality maturity and trying to help bring in efficiency in our compliance processes. Again, when it comes to efficiency, it is also about adopting automation, try and see where we can bring in automation. Is it possible to drive innovation in your processes? Last but not the least, the operating model. Traditionally, the pharma and biotech industry has always operated on a traditional office environment model. So basically, everyone in the office, everyone on the floor. So can we reimagine that? Can we reevaluate that operating model? Do we need everyone to be in the office every day? For example, people working with suppliers, do we need them to be in the office all the time? Or, for example, people working on, let's say, APQRs, people working on investigations. Can we give them sort of a hybrid working model where they can schedule their gembas on the particular days that they're in the office and sort of give them time off working from their homes to work on, writing up an deviation or working on, working on the review and the approval process. So it is important for us to understand that, we need to have mitigation actions. We need to reimagine and reevaluate how we operate in this new environment. So with that, I'll move to the last factor, testing ourselves, right? So how are we self-aware? Do we know where we stand? Do we understand at what stage are we in terms of our compliance status, and do we understand the inherent risks or the risks that we carry in our processes? And that it is important for us to understand that. So internal audit is of paramount importance to be able to achieve a stage of self-awareness. So internal audit. Again, going back to our experience with remediation programs, we've identified there are three ways in which risks are usually identified. The risks are identified by the firms themselves, and that is a function of having a really effective internal audit program, and they are incredibly self-aware as to where their risks are and where they stand. The other, but that's only a minor, that's only a minor fraction of our clients that we see that they're able to identify the risks themselves. More often than not, someone else identifies the risks for them. And in some cases, they were aware of the risk, but they just did not have the bandwidth to have a mitigation in place, or they just let that slip through the cracks. So more often than not, we identify that the remediation programs are a function of risks that have been identified by a regulator or by a third party, or that there are risks that have not been, that they just don't have the bandwidth to, mitigate the risks in their system. So it is important, absolutely important for us to understand that you are your toughest critic. So it is important to have a very effective internal audit program, and it is a major tenet in the continuous improvement cycle. It is important for you that your internal audit program is run by professionals within your organization that are trained and that are capable of performing an effective audit. And the internal audit system would act as sort of a system performance review, and it would also help with the quality maturity model that we were talking about. The fact that you're self-aware and the fact that you understand what are the initiatives or improvements that need to be brought in to be able to move to the next stage is very important for you, and that would be a function of an effective internal audit process. And having a benchmarking process, again, what we see is there are some functions within the same firm that have a much more effective process in place, and there are some that may not have an effective process. How can they learn from each other? They're operating in the same environment. What's different? Is it a function of talent? Is it a function of bandwidth? Or is it a function of not having the right amount of manpower? So those are things that can be fixed internally. And again, that is a function of having an effective internal audit program. And it is also pertinent that the internal audit program helps you collect and retain needed evidence. For example, when you run an audit, when you audit your inspection, your self-inspection program, or when your retains inspection program, you are aware of the kind of documentation that exists, and you are aware of the risks that exist with your annual inspection, your retain inspection program. And that is a small example, right? So that your internal audit program is already stress testing them, and it is also telling them what the risks are, what the inherent risks are, and you are aware of what corrective actions need to be taken before a regulatory agency walks in. So the bottom line here is having an effective internal program is very, very important for you. It kind of rounds off the list of 5 critical factors that we articulated today in order to achieve an effective in order to achieve an effective compliance status. Okay, so with that, I come to an end with that brings us to an end the presentation. I would like to bring your attention to the upcoming pharma webinars that we are hosting as NSF. Lynn Byers will finish the remediation series with a case study of a recent remediation project. with a client that had their license suspended. It is a very important case study, and it would be really helpful for anyone out there who are in a similar situation with regulatory agencies. And then in July, my colleague Sanjay Shetkar will be joining us for an India-specific pharma market update. He would be looking at the state of the pharma sector in India in 2022. So make sure you book in for both of these great webinars, and these would be incredibly informative for you. And we'll also be able to help you understand what you need to be able to achieve mature compliance status. So our team of ex-regulators are always around. As I said, NSF has been around for a long time. We've got an incredible bunch of ex-regulators and industry experts who've seen it all, who've worked with, who've worked across the wide spectrum of the pharma and biotech space and also med devices. So, don't forget that we are here to help with any of the issues that you have regarding with any of these factors that we discussed today. And we are always just a call away or an email away. So speak to us. We are always there for you to help you mitigate any risks or help you move up the quality maturity ladder. Thank you.